Welcome to the Sweet Science of Fighting podcast. Today, just me. Episode, I think we're on 161 or 162 now, so we're pumping through these, but didn't get a guest this week. Had a few people kind of book different days, and it's just been all over the place. Two crazy kids. Those of you who have two young ones, you will understand. So things have been pretty chaotic. So I'm jumping on here, doing a solo one. Hopefully next week I've got a few different guests hopefully lined up that will be coming on to chat all the things, various strength conditioning stuff. But today's topics I want to cover, because I've had some questions recently, so I thought I'd just kind of cover them on here. One regarding, building muscle or adding size as a fighter, kind of how to go about that, at least in a sensible way. I think just because a lot of the information out there currently on building muscle is geared towards fitness and bodybuilding. And that's kind of permeated its way into sports performance, which is unfortunate for people who aren't so familiar with, training. So I'll cover that. I'll cover some of my recent YouTube video I did on tempo training, and I'll just go from there. I don't have too many notes. I'm just going to kind of riff on this one. But also make sure this is the final week to sign up for the conditioning mentorship. We're in cohort 3. We had a lot of interest for doing cohort 3. So if you want to do this, it'll be the last one this year. It is $697, or you can do a split pay option where you pay half now, half in October, which is a damn good deal. I think it's like $350 or $340 odd dollars for the first month, and same for the second month. And that will get you into the 8-week mentorship. It's 4 live calls. You have 8 weeks of, what would you call them? Course modules that you would do in there. And that's going to cover, you basically get for that $700, a master's level education on physiology, which is invaluable. And considering a university education is going to cost you thousands, and this won't. And then you also get one-on time with Dr. Andrew Usher. If you need it or want it, he'll break down any of your data, help you with anything you need in there on top of the live calls. Plus, we have a community area where you can post anything you want, any questions. So it's a pretty full-on 8 weeks. Not full-on in terms of your time investment, because you can kind of invest as much time as you need or want to. But it is definitely information that you will not have learned in any other course or anywhere else you get information, because no one's teaching this stuff. And that's just because Andrew and Dr. John Mabry are the only ones actually doing this stuff in the real world, which is why they have multiple clubs, teams, and pro athletes reaching out to them to do this stuff. So I highly advise you take advantage and jump on that mentorship, because it'll completely change your whole paradigm on programming conditioning and doing conditioning. We've had coaches from various professional leagues all around the world join it, like UFCPI, NRL, Premiership Rugby. I know there's been more. I can't remember off the top of my head, but there's been multiple sports as well. And we've even had people on there that have no coaching or sports science background. They're just fighters, come in and pick up the information from this and use it for themselves. So it truly is open to anyone who actually wants to improve their conditioning. So make sure you check that out. That'll be down in the description. That will start on the 15th of September. So it'll be in 1 week from today. And once it's closed, it's closed. So make sure you check that out. So that's the final one on that. Also, if you are not into the education side, but you just want programs to follow, check out the Sweet Science of Fighting training app. I've now added a 7-day free trial option. So you can just literally go in and try it yourself for free. And you just cancel it within the app if you don't like it. Pretty simple. I just added the MMA 2.0 365 program. So I have 365 programs, which are entire year's training programs for striking, MMA, and grappling, plus they dominate the mat, cage, and ring. And I just added the 2.0 versions, which is the second year, which is really or highly influenced by some of the stuff on these podcasts. I guess they're more quote unquote specific to the adaptations that we want for the sport, if that makes sense. The first year is kind of going to give you a really well-rounded, I guess you could call it, base. So make sure you check those out. And we can dive into today's episode. If you're anything like me, you're short on time. Kids, family, work, training, and having to cook meals on top of that is just not going to happen. So I'm happy to announce Trifecta Nutrition are sponsoring the podcast. You get epic meals like these ones: turkey taco bowl, Texas barbecue protein plate. These are a couple of my favorites. But it means you don't have to prepare all your own meals, and it makes getting and good nutrition relatively easy. I've tried other meal delivery companies. Most of them are too high fat, not enough carbohydrates, or if you're getting kits where you have to cook it yourself, the portions for 2 is actually for 1, especially if you are like me and you're training often. So if you want to take something off your plate and have meals like this delivered to your door, go down the description. There's a link there where you can order trifecta meals. This is the performance line, which are higher protein and higher carbohydrate. And you can use code LIFTBIG40. You'll get 40% off your first order. So we can start with building muscle as a fighter. So obviously there's things you want to consider before even going down this road, and that's typically weight class related. How you decide whether you're going to add muscle to go up a weight class is going to be a conversation between probably yourself and your coach, and maybe your recent performances in competition and things like that and how you feel. So just put that out of the way. But let's assume now that you want to build muscle as a fighter. Now, the approach you take, in my opinion, is going to differ if you are a grappler versus an MMA or striking athlete. And that's because grappling is so highly influenced. At least there's such a big advantage with being big and strong in grappling, and that's just not so much the case in striking, maybe a little bit in MMA. And that's why you see a lot of personal trainer types, when they come into their Instagram marketing stuff, they kind of fall into grappling because you can just apply basic bodybuilding or personal training principles to get someone big and strong. And of course, it's going to help them because it's such a big advantage being big and strong. Whereas when you're in the striking world, or even MMA to an extent, you can't go down that same road and use those same principles. Okay, you can use the same principles, but you're not going to do the same thing because there are other qualities that are more important and have more of an influence than being big and strong. And being big and strong at some, depending on what your sport is, could potentially be counterproductive. So that's just kind of the way I see building muscle. So if I start from the easy side, which is grappling, typically jiu-jitsu, wrestling to an extent, and then judo to an extent, people follow straight powerlifting and bodybuilding programs all the time in these sports. And it's typically not an issue depending on how you've structured your training and how your lifestyle is. So it means you can kind of take a lot of those same principles and you can run things like 3-day full body splits or even 4-day upper lower splits, depending on your actual mat training. And these can work. And typically you're going to adhere maybe slightly closer to what would be deemed as the quote unquote optimal training for hypertrophy, which would be accumulating more sets closer to failure. It'll be doing more sets in a week, so having a little more volume. And because of the volume, you'll be doing a little more frequency in the gym. None of those, in my opinion, apply to when you're looking at striking and MMA, because there is a speed component as well. I mean, yes, grappling, yes, there is also a speed component depending on your game and rule set and maybe your genetic makeup and things like that. But it's not to the same extent as the striking arts and MMA to some extent. So in these cases, you really have to have a focus on keeping speed in. And by keeping speed in, it means that you're always training it even during a block of training where you're trying to gain size. So it means that probably at the beginning of your session, after your typical warm-ups, you might be doing your speed-based work, say it's like 10, 15 minutes of various jumps, plyometrics or throws or whatever it is. Then following that, you will do some of your hypertrophy work. Now, your hypertrophy work isn't going to be the same as what I mentioned with the grapplers. You're not going to be accumulating a lot of sets close to failure. You're not going to be doing a lot of sets for volume, and you're not going to be doing a lot of frequency, because your goal isn't to optimize hypertrophy as a fighter. Your goal is to gain size, but also retain or develop other qualities, and also be able to have energy and not be debilitated from training to be able to do technical training. So these are other considerations you need to take into account. Now, typically, in my experience, this means not doing a lot for the lower body. I'm not saying don't train the lower body, but what I'm saying is you're not doing a lot of hypertrophy-based training for the lower body. And I say this because you spend a lot of time on your legs in these sports. I'm trying to frame this correctly. Having a lot of mass on your legs typically isn't a positive adaptation. For example, in striking and even in MMA to an extent. And then on top of that, when you're doing a lot of hypertrophy style stuff for the legs, the recovery times are much longer. So you have a twofold problem if you're doing, say, a typical hypertrophy session for lower body, squats, leg press, leg curls, leg extensions, all that in a session. Or even if they're spread out over the week, it's still a lot. So that twofold problem, turns into negative adaptations that you need for the sport. And then it also starts to blunt the speed and power development because of that fatigue and because of the work you're doing, where the adaptations trying to gain from it don't exactly align with speed power adaptations. And for the lower body, we know that the lower body contributes a lot to all the strikes, shooting takedowns, etc. So in my opinion, you train the lower body movements like you would in a typical strength and power training program. So that would typically mean lower volumes or reps. Depending on the week or whatever it is, you might be a little further away from failure. And you'll be doing a lot more, I guess you could say, explosive movements, if that makes sense. So you might complex in that example, you might be doing squats complex with jumps. And that will... Your nutrition intake is going to dictate whether you build muscle or not, because you don't have to be close to failure to build muscle, because a lot of people will say, okay, you need to be as close to failure or to failure as possible to maximize hypertrophy. Sure, but you can still build muscle 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 reps away from failure. So that's what I'm trying to get out there. So you're going to kind of strength power the lower body, and then you're going to do more of the hypertrophy style work for the upper body. It doesn't mean you're not going to do your strength power stuff for the upper body. It just means that in that session, you might be doing more kind of dumbbell bench for a little higher reps. You might be doing arms and shoulders maybe closer to failure with the isolation movements, whereas you're probably not going to be doing that for the lower body with leg extensions and leg curls. And that is going to help you maintain and develop speed and power while building some size. And I've done this extensively with that, especially within rugby, where guys have to be big and armored because they're running into each other, but you can't smash their legs because you're on the field and you're doing 20 plus kilometers a week in movement and running. Depending on the week, you might be doing even more. And if you're smoking someone's legs in a session and then having them do sprints and everything else, you're essentially running into injury problems. So you can apply the exact same methodology in the combat sports, where you're kind of more strength power with the lower body. You can still do strength power with the upper body, but you're going to do more of your hypertrophy stuff and isolation-based work, dumbbell work, rows, pull-ups, all that kind of stuff. And that's the stuff you want to push closer to failure, even bodyweight work, because it is it's easier to recover from. So it's not about optimizing the hypertrophy response from training. It's about doing some of that work, but allowing other qualities to still come through, and also allowing you to still get into technical training and not be an absolute bum while you're there. So that's just things to keep in mind. In terms of maybe a general program structure, as I mentioned, you might do some of your speed-based stuff in the beginning. You might complex a lower body movement, and you might even complex an upper body movement, like bench press and throws. And then you might finish out with some high rep rows and pull-ups and curls and triceps and lateral raises. That kind of stuff will kind of fit. And that will kind of be planned out throughout the week, so you're not doing a whole bunch on one day of just kind of one body part or one area. I would avoid doing body part splits like the plague. They do not serve any purpose as an athlete, and they will just make it much harder, essentially, to do everything. But your other options, typically full body. If you're doing 4 days a week, say you're a grappler, you can do 4 days a week. Now, there is actually a program in the SWEETSCIENCE Fight and Training app for moving up a weight class. I designed that for strikers with some of these principles in mind. So you can check that out if you like. Which kind of actually brings me to this idea of tempo. The podcast I did with Bill Smart a couple of weeks ago, you should check that out as well if you haven't listened to it. We talked about some of this tempo stuff and about the variables kind of when you're comparing UFC level fighters, and we're talking like top 5 UFC level fighters versus professional fighters that aren't in the UFC yet. Basically, eccentric qualities differentiated these high-level UFC guys to professional guys to the largest effect. This is during a counter movement jump, so just a vertical jump, basically. Jump height did not. Now, as I mentioned in the video I did, it doesn't mean jump height is useless. Just didn't predict level of MMA fighter in this particular cohort. Now, when we talk about the eccentric qualities, when we talk about eccentric qualities during a jump, we're looking at how fast someone can descend, how fast someone can then put the brakes on during that descent, and then how much force is being produced at that kind of transition area. And why this is important is how can I break this down so it's manageable? Eccentric qualities are going to often dictate how powerful we are during concentric contractions or concentric actions, or whatever you want to call it. And this is because you need to be efficient at essentially using that elastic energy to be able to maximize force production on the other side. And people who don't have that ability will struggle to maximize, I guess you could say, struggle to maximize the speed to produce high forces and power at high speeds. And we want to be able to produce high force and power at high speeds, because that means we're going to be able to deliver a shit ton of force and impulse and momentum into whatever the target is, which means pretty devastating knockout strikes, or you could say taking shots through people. So regarding these eccentric qualities, we see the eccentric peak velocity places. Basically, if you take a cohort of professional and UFC fighters, 90 UFC fighters would be in like the 95th percentile for that cohort, for that quality. So be able to descend really fast. And they can also do the same thing, and they can brake and pump the brakes really quickly. And you want to be able to do this because it's going to help you quickly be able to throw strikes and quickly be able to move around the cage. Whereas someone who does not have these qualities are going to be much slower typically. And we can either improve this quality in training, or we can look to make it worse. And that's not to say that there isn't a time and place for different types of training that do opposite adaptations, because there always is, because you're not going to just do eccentric overload type training and training, because one, is very stressful, and two, you still need to be able to produce a lot of force and power concentrically. So doing like your heavy, I don't know, let's just say 3-to-3 squats. Yes, you still got to do stuff like that. But going through blocks, which is, I guess it's usually very popular where people will go through like a tempo block, where it's something like 3 to 5 seconds down, and then, 1 second up or explode up, or whatever it is. Or even like a pause on the bottom and then explode up. Doesn't quite meet the demands that we want, at least based on this cohort's data. Now, if we took a wrestling-based cohort in MMA, maybe we wouldn't see this. So it could definitely be style dependent. But since all fights start on the feet, you probably want to have some of these qualities. Because in order to be able to descend quickly in this jump and pump the brakes on really quickly, there are structural adaptations that you need to have, and morphological adaptations you need to have. But morphological is, typically muscle fiber type driven, which eccentric training is going to really bias and shift towards that faster twitch muscle fiber. Regarding structural changes, you're looking at muscle fascicle length, so length of how many sarcomeres or blocks of muscle fibers you have in a row. The longer that muscle fiber, the faster the contractile velocity. You're looking at reductions in pronation angle. You're looking at increases in tendon stiffness. All of these things come along with eccentric overload style training. Now, some of those, for example, like tendon stiffness, can come along just from heavy strength training, but you're not going to typically get the changes in muscle fascicle length or decrease in pronation angle from heavy style strength training. It doesn't mean there isn't a place for it. But it's just something to keep in mind that if you're deliberately slowing the eccentric phase during a lift, and I'm not talking doing eccentric overload, I'm talking, say you're doing 70% 1RM, and you're doing 5 seconds down, are we getting out of that what we want for the fighter? And I say that because what are we trying to achieve by doing that? Because as if you are just a beginner and you haven't been in the gym and you're just starting lifting, none of this even matters, because you can do anything and you will get stronger, faster, more powerful. So I'm completely ignoring that cohort. Once you've got some intermediate level, I guess, strength under you, training age, you've got relatively good numbers. Is doing a tempo block or phase worth it? I don't think it is. I don't think it makes any sense in that instance. Works well for if you're just trying to drill some kind of technical changes within a lift, especially for beginners. But for people who know already how to lift, there's no need to do a 3 to 5 second down eccentric on a 70 or 80% 1RM squat, bench, or whatever it is. And means you're going to, if you do a lot of it, you're basically shifting the adaptations away from these eccentric ones that we want. These ones that differentiate the highest level fighters, the professionals, you're shifting that away just from slowing that eccentric down. So yeah, that's some of my thoughts on the tempo stuff. Now, it doesn't mean that the concentric side isn't important, because we still need to be able to push, essentially, at least from a jumping perspective based on the starter. So you're still going to be doing your main lifts as such. I think that we can get too stuck in this idea of the barbell lifts being the main things, when there are many ways to go about improving peak force, or even just impulse in the gym. It doesn't have to be a barbell back squat or front squat. There are many single leg options you can use. There are many other pieces of equipment you can use, like flywheels, all of these, even ballistic movements, weightlifting, jumping, these will all help. And it doesn't just have to be a barbell lift. They just work really well because they're relatively stable. You can load them heavy, and it allows you to push hard against them. Yeah, I think that was everything I wanted to cover regarding that. If you have any questions, throw them down in the description or in the comments as well, and I can tee them up for another podcast or do a video on them. There's a lot of different stuff I can do. But that was a short one today. I'll have some guests coming up, and we're going to cover, it's got one it'll be on boxing Olympic prep. I have one on microdosing. I need to follow one that would be quite cool, and the Major League Baseball with microdosing. It's going to get the UFC PI Shanghai. I think that was it off the top of my head. Yeah, and then I'll have some more for you guys. So stay tuned. Please make sure you check the description for the conditioning mentorship and the training app, and I'll catch you guys in the next podcast.